Tonight, we're watching the Eastern Pacific for possible tropical developments next week. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for July 22nd. Right now, all we have left are the remnants now of Estelle, which has died off as a tropical cyclone entity earlier today. It lasted quite long actually, as a weak tropical storm before completely dying away. People were getting impatient with it. But nothing else is active around the world right now. On day 52 of Atlantic hurricane season, there aren't even any areas of interest to look at over the next 5 days, which I guess is not too unexpected for the time of year. But after recent seasons, I think people might have been expecting a little more activity, but nothing on the radar just now. In the Eastern Pacific, it's day 69 of hurricane season, the remnants of Estelle trawling out to sea, and we're looking at that area of interest. In fact, that's a new one, 20% chance over the next 5 days, moving off the coast of Central America. In the Western Pacific, there is nothing of note to talk about right now either. Although in long range, models are suggesting that we may get something starting up fairly soon. It really is round about that time where we should be starting to see significant West Pacific developments, so I think that might be on the way soon. In the Indian Ocean, there's nothing active right now, no areas of interest, but there are little rumblings that in the South Indian Ocean, there might be something starting to form towards the end of this 5-day period, but as yet, nothing has been marked. Looking at satellite imagery across the North Atlantic Ocean right now, you can see that the picture is rather similar to what it has been in recent days, with dry air dominating most of the ocean, a front moving across the Atlantic there towards the Azores now, and some thunderstorms blowing up over various parts of the Caribbean and in the southern United States. In the Eastern Pacific, you can see down there in the tropical zone some disturbances, but as we've mentioned in previous updates, they're going to be fighting against each other really for a potential low level circulation, and if that happens, then a potential tropical cyclone genesis. It's going to be hard to do if there's competing centers, which is what GFS has been suggesting might be the case for a little bit before something eventually forms out of this whole mess. Out over the western area though, you can see what's left of Estelle over there. It's still got some light convection when you look at the visible imagery, but when you look at the infrared, which I'm not sure we'll get a look of on this just today, but on the infrared there's hardly anything going on with it now at this point. So Estelle is done. Its effects will probably continue through the Eastern Pacific, and you'll probably be able to trace it for a few more days as just a little swirl of clouds. Western Pacific looks like this right now, and actually looking pretty decent, that little thing through the Mariana Islands. That was what the GFS has been pointing out for a potential cyclone, or was in earlier days. And to be honest, it's looking pretty decent, but it's not going to develop into anything. It will never contain gale force winds on all four sides, so that's something that we'll be ruling out. The Indian Ocean getting rather busy in the Bay of Bengal with a lot of convective activity, monsoonal of course in the usual pattern, and in the southern hemisphere no signs of that potential system forming yet, but it will be soon. Australian region showing a lot of cloudiness around Queensland, southern Queensland, and not far off of New Caledonia, and a few frontal systems blowing through South Australia and well east of New Zealand now at this point. So looking at the sea surface temperatures, and there's always not much different compared to the last update, but sometimes we get people tuning in after a few days away, and that's why we always go through this. Temperatures touching 30 degrees in the Gulf of California. In the Gulf of Mexico, also temperatures getting very warm, 30 degrees plus, also towards the Bahamas, and you can see that Gulf Stream strengthening even more, maybe even a tiny little 30-degree area at the same latitude as Jacksonville there, and 28-degree isotherm extending out to the same latitude as the Delmarva Peninsula. Indian Ocean, Bay of Bengal very warm, Arabian Sea a little bit cool for the most part due to the winds. In the Western Pacific though, temperatures pushing 30 degrees again over large parts of the ocean, and I think I might spy a little bit of 32 there off the coast of western China, and towards Japan, decent temperatures once again, 26 to 28 degrees Celsius, also extending just about to almost as far as the Korean Peninsula and up the east coast of China. You can see actually that area on the seasurface temperature anomalies is quite a bit above normal. La Nina effect still very prevalent in the central Pacific there, with some decent cool anomalies, although the eastern Pacific is around normal. The Atlantic Ocean is above average on the whole, except in the eastern Atlantic subtropical regions. And here is the oceanic heat content showing that the Western Caribbean is primed, as is the Gulf of Mexico, for some serious activity there. Eastern Pacific is starting to lighten up just a little bit off the coast of Mexico, a little area out to sea there. And in the Western Pacific, of course, it's always ready. It's just waiting for some storm to touch that area of dark red and probably embark on a rapid intensification spell. So then, this is what the models are suggesting, or the GFS at least, over the next 5 days. You can see there potentially more than one centre trying to compete, and at the end of that loop you can see that new area of mass coming through, and then that's what we think will start to develop into that tropical cyclone. It's a rapidly evolving situation, and there's very low certainty about anything happening there. Estelle there moving well off out towards southwestward movement actually later on there as a remnant low. Western Pacific, you can see where we're looking at next. This next system forming near the Mariana Islands, and you can see it moving off there along the coast of Japan, and I think we were looking at a next system forming, because I'm looking at an old one here, but I think you're seeing something new that's forming a tropical cyclone near Japan. If that doesn't happen in 5 days, it happens between 5 and 10. Looking at the Indonesian area right now in the South Indian Ocean, you can see that towards the end of that 5-day period, a massive area tries to wrap up and rotate into an enormous tropical cyclone there with a massive wind field. It doesn't quite make it there towards the end of that 5-day period, but later on it ends up consolidating a little bit better on the GFS model, but no other models are in agreement with anything like this happening just yet. Look to the longer range and we look at the Eastern Pacific with those potential tropical cyclones forming. There it is, the one that we've marked as 20%, briefly becoming a tropical cyclone and then weakening again. And behind that, another one forming towards the end of that 10-day period from that same messy area towards the east there, first noted off the coast of Central America there, and then moving westwards and then eventually northwestwards as a tropical storm. I wouldn't put much faith into any of that scenario happening. It will probably end up being completely different whether the storm forms there or not. Right then, Western Pacific, here's the storm forming, and an enormous thing it is, it must be said. Large wind field, and then eventually becomes a typhoon, and a category 2 typhoon at least there on that imagery. So that's what the GFS is thinking about, and these kind of erratic tracks are usually quite common at this time of year, and very broad systems can happen as well. I'm just not sold that this is going to happen at all really just yet. And in the South Indian Ocean, another thing that we're not sold on at all is that potential tropical cyclone. This is day 5 to 10, and you see eventually it does consolidate well and actually become a hurricane equivalent storm on the GFS there as we enter the beginning of August, but well, it's a long shot, and you can also notice a tropical cyclone in the North Indian Ocean there as well. Most people would argue that that is poppycock, and it continues moving west-northwestwards through that period there. Very messy storm. Anyway, that's all the serious stuff done. At this point, you can take a look at our merch store and scan that barcode there to enter the merch store, where we still waiting for Hone merch, as well as animations on demand, individual storms and full season animations. Well, into the Scilly Range, we take a look at another tropical storm there in the eastern Pacific, that second one that we had forming, becoming a significant hurricane, albeit a small one. Actually, that first system regenerates well out to sea, so that would be a rather curious scenario if that were to take place, but you can just see how messy that situation is there in the eastern Pacific, and it'll all be a big energy struggle between multiple different systems, and what it really means is that we probably won't get a strong storm out of that sequence. In the western Pacific then, you see this typhoon, erratic movement still towards Japan, eventually continuing to grow, and eventually it does make that landfall there in central Honshu, and then off towards the north, and dying off quite quickly actually after it makes landfall, probably over chilly waters, to the north of the Japanese islands. So landfall there would be just east of Osaka, and I think it's just west of Kumamoto, if my geography serves me right. But there we go, that's the western Pacific, and what's left of the Indian Ocean cyclone continues on its jaunt westwards here, and it would just be making a mockery of the whole thing if it managed to move west across the whole basin after reaching that hurricane equivalent peak right in the middle of off-season. But there we go, that's what the GFS is throwing out right now. You have permission to laugh. But in any case, that's all of what the model has to divulge. And let's just remind ourselves, in the 5-day period there is only one system with any chance of forming. Well, back in July 22nd, 1997, we had a much different situation occurring. We had a Category 5 Rosie in the Western Pacific pictured, and that was headed towards the west-northwest, I think. I can't remember whether that made landfall or not, or whether it stayed out to sea. You'll have to remind us in the comments. Danny there had weakened to a depression after making its landfall in the United States. It would become a tropical storm again after moving offshore of the east coast. And Felicia was just about to die off as it approached the Hawaiian Islands, which has funny little comparisons to yesterday, where we had another storm that was dying off. I think that was Estelle. This year though, in 2022, the next name on the Atlantic naming list is Danielle. Funny to think that we're behind 1997 right now in the Atlantic. The East Pacific, Frank is next up, and in the Central Pacific, the next name on the list is still Hone. In the Western Pacific, Songda would be the next name if it becomes our 37th storm of the year, and in the North Indian Ocean, the next name on the list is Sitrang. Moving on to the Southern Hemisphere in the Australian region, the next name is Darian. The Southwest Indian Ocean will begin with Ashley, maybe sooner than expected. And in the South Pacific, the next name on the list there is Harley. We'll be back again with another tropical weather bulletin tomorrow night.